Good afternoon. I'm Jennifer Gordon, the Managing Editor and Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. I am delighted to welcome our audience and speakers to today's discussion on strengthening global safeguards and security in an advanced nuclear age, co-hosted by the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center and Third Way. We are here to talk about the intersection between the development of advanced nuclear reactors and with safeguards and security. And I am delighted to introduce Dr. Brent Park, who is the Deputy Administrator for Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation at the National Nuclear Security Administration, to deliver keynote remarks. Dr. Park, thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks for kind introduction. It's good to see many of distinguished leaders in the community, by the way. Just looking at the participants on the screen, I see Laura Holgate. Good to see you. From my office, I see experts like Jeff Chamberlain, Kim Veal, Allison I see. I'm sure there are many more. So good to be talking with all of you. Something interesting about this pandemic environment. Well, one good thing is that we get to talk to each other in a very creative way in a virtual setting. So I appreciate this opportunity to say hello and to give you a bit of a perspective from my own office. So for those of you who do not know what I do, I represent the DOE NNSA, National Nuclear Security Administration's Office of Defense Nuclear Nonproliferation. And I just want to give you a bit of a perspective as to what we focus on that might be of interest to all of you. And a little bit of a background. So I started my career at Los Alamos National Lab in the 80s. I showed up just to finish my PhD work in nuclear physics. And I ended up staying and I ended up retiring from Los Alamos National Lab. And soon after that, I moved to Nevada Test Site and then off to Oak Ridge National Lab. And I also have retired from those places as well. And I was running a little less than 3 years ago. So I actually had the pleasure of working with many people, including some of the people who represent the civilian nuclear side. So again, it's great to be talking with you. More as an intro, the Energy Department is led by Dan Brouillette, Secretary of Energy. And NNSA is led by Lisa Gordon-Haggerty. So there's a strong cooperation within the DOE, also within the NNSA, working with the Office of Nuclear Energy within the Energy Department and many others. And I myself work closely with the State Department for International Outreach Program, and I'll touch upon some of the international engagement that might be of interest to you as well. And I'm going to apologize to Jeff Chamberlain because I'm actually skipping some of the details he provided for me to go over. Some of the details that are relevant for our conversation today. We actually have 5 different offices. The fifth one is a brand new one. The first 4 is worth going over in the very brief details, as we focus quite a bit on eliminating and minimizing weapons usable materials. And the expert like Kevin Veal focuses on the safeguarding and securing sites, the limiting nuclear weapons stockpiles and controlling the proliferation of nuclear materials and technologies expertise. And we spent a lot of time working with the interagency partners, so-called interagency partners like a State Department and so on, to make sure that we can monitor and verify the nuclear programs around the world. We make a lot of promises with many countries, so-called the treaties, and it's going to be verifiable. And much of what my office does is to develop technologies so they can actually do proper assessments. This is more of a self-imposed question, or something that I'm asked to address is, what do all these things mean to you, especially the companies that are interested in developing advanced reactors? And as it turns out, much of the requirements are in the form of what we call non-proliferations. We really support the peaceful use. We are all for peaceful use of nuclear technologies. And by the same token, when we reverse the arguments, we are really concerned about potential or actual misuse of the technologies. we share with other countries. And so that's actually bulk of what my office is responsible for, and my office is focusing on with experts throughout the labs. One thing that you might want to know a little bit more about is it's not just at the headquarters. So I have several other people who focus on these things, but throughout the DOE national labs, such as Idaho National Lab, Oak Ridge National Lab, Oregon National Lab, as well as the Los Alamos, Sandia, and Livermore, and many other labs, including Southern River National Lab. We have actually truly the wide variety of experts from the designing to assessment, building and testing and operating. And these are the people that actually make things happen for all of us. And so we want to really work with you to make sure you get to benefit from us, our experts. At the same time, we get to work with you to make sure what you need to understand from the government or international bodies like IAEA, upfront what we are expecting from the partnerships with companies, so that you would not be surprised going forward. So these are the things that we do. And the way we look at the world is non-proliferation is a part of the nuclear systems, nuclear technologies, and nuclear reactors, and so on. And my personal, the phrase that I use oftentimes, it's not separable. Yeah, that's actually important distinction that I hope you get out of my short talk this morning or this afternoon, depending upon where you are. And so there's a direct linkage between the how we protect it and how we actually share the technologies. I'm sure many of you do know 123 agreements that the United States government actually has with other countries. And through that mechanism and through others, that by working with IAEA and other like-minded countries, we'd like to project importance of non-proliferation so that we can actually operate these new reactors or existing ones in a more secure and safeguarded manner. And so the one thing that I like to touch upon a little bit is that you heard a lot about Office of Nuclear Energy that is represented by Rita Barrymore. And I work closely with her to make sure that we support the overall, what we call civilian nuclear technologies. And the way I do it is by working with her office to make sure we actually know the requirements upfront as much as possible, and lend our support from the tech assessment, and as simple as doing the safeguards analysis. And we have literally hundreds of people focusing on how to make the nuclear operations more safer. And defense nuclear non-proliferation actually focuses a lot on how to actually handle and dispose of nuclear materials that are no longer needed. And again, we have a lot to offer working with the other offices, starting with the Office of Nuclear Energy. And something about I'm actually skipping the 3 slides. I'm not sure if this, talk that I'm giving would allow us for me to take some questions, but I'll take a chance on leaving some room at the end. It's actually worth repeating. I just shared with you the fact that we work closely with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. It's very important for us to actually have international standards that all country members could follow. It's not U.S. alone going, the leading the way. It's actually working with other countries to make sure that these are the things that guidelines rather that other countries could follow. And we work with many countries, depending on what areas you talk about. If it is the material security, we work with over 100 countries. If it is safeguards, we work with just as many. We are very much interested in sharing our experience and technologies. And there's a lot of training that we provide through IAEA or with other countries. And so we have done this probably longer than any other country. So we have a lot to share and learn from other countries who are actually interested in pursuing nuclear technologies for peaceful purpose. And we actually spend a lot of R&D, research and development efforts, money and people and so on to continuously enhance how we can actually handle the nuclear technologies for more of a peaceful purpose. The one thing that is worth discussing is that many of you should know or might know that we've been working with more than 30, 40, 50 countries over the last 40 plus years on HEU to LEU conversion, highly enriched uranium to low enriched uranium on many of the research reactors. Over the last 40 plus years, we have converted more than 103 research reactors or decommissioned them. And so we're taking actually another step forward by trying to establish a program. It's called the ProX. It's I gotta pronounce it carefully. Proliferation resistant optimization, and then you can fill in the blank for the X, whether it's a core or the system. And so we're more interested in working with the companies to see if we can provide our technical expertise upfront, so it can be baked into the DNA of the reactor design. And we're looking forward to having more active dialogue and conversation with all of you. And in fact, there is something called the GAIN at Idaho National Lab for many companies to work with, specifically Office of Nuclear Energy. And that we actually have a similar program that we're about to start. It's called Nexus out of Oregon National Lab. This is another way for the companies to work with the DNN, my office, to have an easier time talking to the experts. And we will find a way to talk to you through Oregon National Lab. And the Oregon National Lab would actually work with other national lab experts to make sure you get the information that you need. And there's quite a bit of removing the materials that are no longer needed. And we're continuously looking for ways to make alternative technologies available when possible. When we need to use the nuclear materials, we like to do it in a manner that we actually know how they would behave in a stressful environment. At the end of the use, we know what to do with it. So my office is looking at the full life cycle aspect of how to prepare the material, how to use it, and how to get rid of it at the end of its useful life. So it's a life cycle aspect of it, and that's actually what we want to work with many companies on. And that's something that we need to do a better job informing you, keeping you in the loop. So that might be something of interest that you can get from experts like Jeff Chamberlain, Kevin, and Allison from my office who are participating in this important conversation. And let's see, I covered the ProX. I didn't realize I covered all these things. One thing that I'd like to actually touch upon briefly is that I know many of you are anxiously waiting for new test reactors out of Office of Nuclear Energy. So we can actually qualify the materials, do the characterizations that we need to do to help design and build next generation reactors. And we're closely working with the Office of Nuclear Energy to look at all those things to make sure that the non-proliferation requirements are baked in without slowing down the progress on the new designs or the things that you want to pursue in coming months and years. And for those of you who are really comfortable with or knowledgeable of how Energy Department operates, it's a very big organization. In addition to NNSA, in addition to Office of Nuclear Energy, there is a substantial amount of research going on in the Office of Science, and they do a basic research. And so we work with them closely on material characterizations. So this is a department-wide effort that we actually carry out. I just want to say thanks for paying attention to the non-proliferation requirements as you go forward, and we have experts standing by to work with you, and I'm really thrilled that I got the 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes to talk to you. And I'd like to say thanks to Jennifer for coordinating all this. And again, good to see all my friends. And again, I'd like to say thanks to Jeff Chamberlain for writing me a nice speech that I only read half of, but I thought it's more important that I get to talk to you rather than just reading a speech. which is actually available. If you want a copy, ask Jeff and he'll give it to you. But I think I covered the essence of it. But again, Jennifer, back to you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Dr. Park, thank you so much. This was a fabulous way to begin today's conversation, both about international civil nuclear cooperation, and also I think you really just wonderfully set the stage for the conversation that we're going to have in our panel portion between NNSA on the one hand and GAIN on the other, and then of course hearing from Laura Holgate at NTI about what NGOs can also do to support this process. But first, I would like to turn the floor over to Jackie Kempfer, who is a senior policy advisor at Third Way's Climate and Energy Program. And Jackie is also one of our newest non-resident senior fellows at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Jackie, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Very, very excited to be here today. And I just want to thank Dr. Park for his remarks. Absolutely love it when someone in a leadership role, such as yourself, goes off script, and we get to hear candid remarks. Those were fantastic. So today, I just briefly want to tell folks who may not be familiar with Third Way who we are and what we do. So as Jennifer mentioned, I'm a senior policy advisor at Third Way with the Clean Energy Program, or excuse me, with the Climate and Energy Program. And our program designs and advocates for policies that will drive innovation and deployment of clean energy technologies to help us fight climate change, to deliver the emissions cuts that we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. We have been, as an organization and as a program, working on and focusing on the potential role of advanced nuclear energy technologies to combat climate change for about the past 10 years. And so if we could just bring up the slide deck, I'm just going to briefly walk through our brand new international map. So while we've made incredible strides over the last decade in clean energy technologies, we haven't come close to reaching the level of innovation needed to truly confront climate change. To do so, we're going to need breakthroughs in storage, advanced geothermal, carbon capture, hydrogen production, and advanced nuclear. And just as the original prototypes do not resemble today's solar panels and wind turbines, tomorrow's nuclear, as most of you know, looks very different from the plants of today. The next generation of nuclear power will be more cost-effective and safer than ever. If it isn't, it won't succeed in the marketplace. So since 2015, next slide, please. Since 2015, Third Way has been tracking the commercialization of advanced nuclear projects in North America. And over the last 5 years, these reactors have progressed far more rapidly than anyone predicted. But we are not alone in this pursuit. Russia and China recognize this opportunity and are aggressively developing new reactor designs to capture the emerging market for advanced nuclear and the global influence that will come with it. That is why Third Way set out to develop our new map. We wanted to highlight the very real opportunity and strategic need for the United States to reclaim its leadership in an industry that is critical for both climate change and national security, an industry that will leave us behind if we fail to act. Next slide, please. Our new interactive map provides a first-of-a-kind nuclear readiness assessment and electricity demand projections in 2030 and 2050 for 148 countries. Now, we know advanced nuclear energy can play a meaningful part in addressing climate change and growing energy demand, but we wanted to know how meaningful and which markets might be ready for this new technology. So to get at these 2 points, we set out to answer 2 questions. Who will be ready for nuclear power in 2030 or 2050? And how much additional electricity demand will be needed by 2050? So we define a country as ready for nuclear by considering if it could be a customer for advanced nuclear supplier and credibly negotiate a purchase agreement with an international supplier country. And we did this through creating our first-of-a-kind nuclear readiness rubric. We determined this by using a 10-point checklist covering internal institutions and controls, such as policy and regulatory agencies, as well as external signals of interest, such as engagement with supplier countries and international institutions like the International Atomic Energy Agency. And then to estimate future electricity consumption, we use historical data to establish a trend based on income correlations. We then extrapolate this relationship to 2030 and 2050 for each country, using data and forecasts from the United Nations, International Energy Agency, International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank. Next slide, please. And so what we found was a big potential market for advanced nuclear, a potential market that spans all regions and all income groups. So what you see here is an image of our map. And I just want to walk through what you're seeing. First, each of the 148 countries in our analysis is marked with a circle. The size of the circles represents the projected additional electricity demand for each country in 2050. The color of the circles represents where each country ranks on our nuclear readiness rubric. And across the top of the map, you will find 7 interactive filters. The first covers the stages of our nuclear readiness rubric. The second is projected percentage growth in national electricity demand from 2017 to 2050. Then you have projected additional electricity demand in terawatt hours for each country in 2050. We then have the World Bank's 4 income groupings. We've also included World Resource Institute's projected water stress ratings in 2040, because nuclear power desalination could play a significant role in addressing the growing demand for potable water. And then finally, most relevant to our discussion today, the Nuclear Threat Initiative worked with us and allowed us access to their nuclear security index. So we've included 2 different pieces from that analysis. We've included ratings that assess actions related to supporting global nuclear security efforts for each country. And we've also included index ratings of 46 countries with nuclear facilities to assess actions to protect those facilities against sabotage. Next slide, please. So briefly, I just want to cover a few of the key takeaways from our findings. First, global electricity demand could more than double by 2050, with 90% of this growth in emerging markets. And we've identified 62 what we refer to as demand engines, which are countries whose electricity consumption will more than triple. Of those, 14 are in Asia, 35 in Africa, and none are in Western Europe or North America. Next slide. These same fast-growing emerging markets are ready or nearly ready for nuclear technology to help meet part of their future energy demand. 86% of new global electricity demand in 2050 is projected in green or light green countries on our readiness rubric, as you can see from this image. Next slide. Finally, the global market for nuclear power could triple by 2050. And under these conditions, new nuclear power could produce up to $400 billion worth of electricity annually. One of the things that I walked away from this with was just a surprise at how big the potential market is and how far-reaching it is. Even with the conservative projections we used, our map only includes projections for new energy assets. It does not include replacements for fossil fuel generation or retiring nuclear plants. Numerous countries, utilities, and manufacturers have plans to achieve net zero emissions by or near mid-century. And in the utility world, 2050 is just one investment cycle away. The average lifespan of a natural gas generator is 22 years, and plants like cement and steel production facilities can run for 20 to 50 years. Our analysis and new map shows just how big of a role advanced nuclear could play, and draws attention to the need to fully commercialize these technologies that they are ready for these markets by the mid-2030s. And I just want to end by kind of bringing this all back and sort of tying it into our discussion today and about how timely this is. Because not only do we need to make sure that these are commercialized and ready for market within this time frame, but we also need to focus on the fact that to maintain the United States global leadership, these advanced nuclear reactors should not only provide affordable zero carbon power, they should provide it in a way that builds upon the nuclear security architecture developed over the last 5 decades. The US government and advanced nuclear developers could be in the position to enhance global nuclear security and safeguards as a new set of aspiring nuclear countries look at deploying a new generation of nuclear reactors. So I'm really excited to have a deeper dive conversation into what I already know is some incredibly exciting work that's happening within NNSA, with GAIN, and new collaborations that are happening between the two. And also to hear from Laura Holgate on her perspective, and really kind of taking us up a higher level and looking at what engagement with some of these potential nuclear newcomer countries might look like. So I'll stop there and kick it back over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you so much for sharing your insights into the International Advanced Reactor Map. I think that one of the most exciting things about this work, other than getting to interact with the map itself and change the different filters and really study it, is the incredible data and analysis that you've put together that sets the stage for follow-on work. From an Atlantic Council perspective, the key point that I'd like to highlight here, of course, is what a map like this could mean for geopolitical alliances and national security as the United States works to become stronger with allies. 3 questions that I think the map raises are: 1, how should the United States engage proactively with the green dot countries that are close or relatively close to acquiring civil nuclear technologies? 2, what does it look like for the United States to engage on nuclear energy with countries where Russia and China may already have a presence through other types of energy infrastructure? And 3, what are the regional implications if one country in any given region were to acquire advanced civil nuclear technologies? So I'm looking forward to working with you and with our colleagues at ClearPath and others in the coming months to start answering some of those questions. And I'm excited to hear now from you and from our panelists. And one quick note to the audience, as I'm sure Jackie will reiterate, if you have questions throughout the course of the panel, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screens to submit your questions. So with that, back over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I too am very excited to see the follow-on work that builds out of this project. It's certainly just a start. So lots more to consider and add on as we move forward. So I just want to start out by introducing briefly our panelists today. I would provide full bios for all of them, but we would be here for the rest of the afternoon. And so our esteemed speakers, I will keep it very brief today in your introductions. We have Kevin Veal, Director of the Office of International Nuclear Safeguards, National Nuclear Security Administration. We have Allison Johnston, Director of the Office of International Nuclear Security at the National Nuclear Security Administration. We have Christine King. She's the Director of the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, or GAIN as most of us know it, at Idaho National Laboratory. And then we have Laura Holgate, Vice President, Materials Risk Management and Nuclear Threat Initiative, and retired ambassador to the IAEA in the former Obama administration. So thank you all for being here today. I know you all, and I'm sure we will have a lively discussion on a very timely topic. So to begin, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Kevin to start off our beginning remarks. Take it away.
Thank you, Jackie. Could we have that first slide, please? Okay, well, while it comes up. So again, I'm Kevin Veal. I work on international safeguards, and I have focused on safeguards for the last 21 years or so. So a question that we often get is, what are international safeguards? So international safeguards are a set of technical measures that are applied by the IAEA or by, in some cases, regional inspectorates to independently and objectively verify that a state's nuclear material is accounted for and is not diverted to nuclear weapons or other nuclear explosive devices. Safeguards by design, which is what I wanted to talk a little bit about today, is a process of including international safeguards considerations into all phases of a nuclear facility project, from initial planning through design, construction, and operation, any modifications that may occur during operation, and ultimately through to decommissioning. Now, the technical measures that the IAEA would typically include are nuclear material accountancy measurements, containment and surveillance techniques to ensure continuity of knowledge or design information. And the IAEA implements these activities through in-person or remote inspections at nuclear facilities, physical measurements of nuclear materials, reviews of records, analysis of safeguards relevant information, and other objective measures. So to help regulatory authorities and facility designers contemplate safeguards by design, since about 2010, DOE and NNSA has developed over a dozen guidance documents, good practice studies, and safeguardability assessments for various types of fuel cycle facilities, including those that are applicable to advanced reactor concepts. Additionally, the IAEA, supported by experts from various member states, have developed a set of safeguards by design guidance documents for the entire fuel cycle. So now I said entire fuel cycle, not just reactors, and that's because when considering the implementation of safeguards, the IAEA looks holistically at where nuclear material is and where nuclear related activities occur, not just at this facility or that facility. For example, the agency has to consider with respect to a reactor, where's the fuel coming from? Where does the fuel go afterwards? What kinds of facility components are being manufactured and where are they manufactured? Are there safeguards issues associated with that activity? So part of what we do in support of the IAEA and safeguards regulatory authorities all over the world is to work together to facilitate effective and efficient implementation of international safeguards. Now, as Dr. Park said a little bit earlier, understanding and considering international safeguards is one important element of the non-proliferation aspects that can help facilitate the successful deployment of nuclear fuel cycle facilities now and into the future. So I think I'll stop there. Thank you. Allison?
Thank you, Kevin, very much. The next slide, please. Good afternoon. I am Allison Johnston. I'm the Director of the Office of International Nuclear Security. NNSA recognizes that preventing nuclear terrorism cannot be seen in isolation from sustainable development goals such as clean energy access. DOE NNSA leads international efforts to prevent the theft and sabotage of nuclear material and facilities worldwide through bilateral or multilateral capacity building to technical exchanges and innovation. NNSA's Office of International Nuclear Security has worked for decades with countries to strengthen nuclear security at the national and facility level. We are committed to working with U.S. advanced reactor community to ensure that U.S. technologies can be exported in a timely and efficient manner with nuclear security principles and technical solutions already factored into their designs. We call this security by design as a complement to what Kevin was talking about with safeguards by design. We realize and respect how much the U.S. nuclear reactor industry has on its plate, from reactor performance to safety and ultimately to costs. In an effort to lighten your load, we think that the Office of International Nuclear Security can help you. We can help you incorporate security considerations throughout the design process for reactors, which will make the U.S. industry more competitive and economically viable. Incorporating security in your designs will appeal to buyer countries, operators, and regulators who are responsible for nuclear security and the international commitments they have to meet. The goal for us is to build relationships with U.S. nuclear energy industry vendors on nuclear security to support restoring U.S. leadership in nuclear and advancing peaceful uses, while also upholding global nuclear security regime. The NNSA has tools that the U.S. industry can use today to incorporate security in the design of their advanced reactors, including, you see these on the slide, analytical methods for adapting physical protection methodologies to the new design characteristics of advanced reactors and small modular reactors technologies, and vulnerability assessment, simulation, and modeling tools, such as those for evaluating response force activities. We also have some new tools under development, including a tool to estimate economic costs and benefits of security for a particular design in a particular country, and a tool to identify sabotage target sets for advanced reactors. We, the Office of International Nuclear Security, we partner with over 40 countries with their current nuclear capabilities, so we understand their individual regulatory frameworks and their nuclear security needs. We have also a long-standing relationship with the IAEA's Department of Nuclear Safety and Security. We can leverage our resources to help you by entering into NDAs and CRADAs with the Department of Energy's national laboratories so that our cooperation will result in more secure, competitive, and exportable reactor designs, that will be better positioned to meet the security requirements of of any host country. Please feel free to contact me directly or follow up with the email on our slide. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Allison. Now we'll kick it over to Christine.
Hi, thanks, Jackie.
Yeah.
So I'm Christine King. I'm the relatively new director of the Gateway for the Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear. So we're homed at Idaho National Labs. However, we work very hard to represent all the work that's going on across in nuclear related activities across all the national labs. Myself, I started in the nuclear business actually doing outage work. My specialty was steam generator maintenance and operability, and helping folks understand how long their steam generators would run prior to replacement, and having those discussions with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I went from there into research and development consulting. And prior to joining GAIN, I was working with an emerging venture capital firm to help encourage the investment in advanced reactors. So I come to GAIN with a passion for the opportunity that is in front of us, not just for the nuclear technology that I have been interested in my entire career, but also for the potential that Jackie talked about before of meeting this moment and helping our climate and ultimately decarbonizing and the transition to multiple different carbon-free technologies and how we all integrate and work together. So let me talk just a little bit about GAIN for those of you that maybe are not familiar with what we do. We are an initiative hosted out of the Department of Energy, Nuclear Energy's office. And our goal is to see the opportunity through the eyes of the developer and understand what their needs are and help them connect to the right resources within the DOE complex, such that we can help them move towards commercialization and deployment faster. We do that in a variety of different ways. We have a voucher program 4 times a year. We accept applications. This in particular is looking to help developers get over an individual hurdle by using the resources, whether it's technical expertise, modeling capabilities, lab facilities, and running experiments. Our voucher program is, it moves, our decisions are made quickly, and the projects themselves move quickly. We've actually, in the 4 years since it was started, we've awarded over 50 vouchers and finished 30. So those projects are completed. The other thing that we do is we host workshops. And I can see in the future where we would probably be hosting a workshop along with our non-proliferation safeguards and security partners. These workshops are important to help the developer community know what resources are available to them and help them connect and work together, have those partnerships going forward. Another aspect of our program also is making sure that legacy data becomes available. So as you know, there's decades of experiments that have been done. I'm guessing not just in our world around the development of advanced reactors, but also in the safeguards and security world. So getting that data available and used is an important aspect of the development of advanced reactors as well. I kind of look at this, all of us it's going to be necessary for all of us to come and play a part in supporting these advanced reactors and the deployment. But what I have noticed over my career is we all tend to come to it with our own point of view, and we come with our own lingo. So it is important that we at GAIN help us to communicate with each other clearly and to see things with empathy and the point of view of one another, such that we can work towards the common goal that we have. So with that, Jackie, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Christine. And then finally, we'll hear from Laura Holgate. Laura?
Thanks, Jackie. This is a great panel to be on, and I've already learned a lot from my friends and colleagues who've spoken before me. I think it might be helpful if we just pause a minute and think about why advanced reactors pose new kinds of challenges from a safeguards and a security point of view. First of all, many of them are small, hence the small modular reactor. This may mean that the reactor halls are more cramped. It may mean that it's more difficult to take measurements or to have visibility into what's going on inside the reactor. Some of them are designed to be mobile. So this creates a whole new set of issues in terms of how they're moved, what the safeguards issues are as they are moved or as the fuel is moved to them. There may be a mismatch between the ownership of a reactor and the location of a reactor. And of course, if it's transportable by the owners, it could also be transportable by people who might steal it. So it creates a new kind of security challenge of a reactor actually on the move, which certainly is not a problem for today's modern gigawatt scale power plants. Many of these reactors are looking at novel fuel materials. Fuels or materials. High assay low enriched uranium, 19% enriched, is not traditionally shipped or manufactured or worked with. And while it's not a direct use material, it's closer to being direct use material than the normal low enriched uranium that is shipped every day around the world. Some of the reactors involve liquid metal fuel, and some of them involve pebbles that are more or less the size of a pool, a billiard ball. So there's a lot of new angles here of what are we actually measuring as compared with a traditional fuel pin with ceramic pellets inside, which is well understood and fairly standard. There's also new models of operations, whether it's a continuous fueling, whether it's a sealed core. Remote operations, where you might have the control room separate from the reactor. I recall talking to one developer when I pointed out that the IAEA needs its own dedicated data port into the core to do safeguards measurements. She's like, oh, wait a second, that means I have to have a second hole in my sealed core. She hadn't thought about that. The other issue, which is reflected in your excellent report, Jackie, is the location of these reactors. These are likely to be countries who have no other nuclear energy program right now, or no reactors. These may be the first reactors they have. Some of them may be used in forward operating bases by the US military. So that's a different model. And we also need to think about if they're talking about remote operation, for example, the reactor in the Arctic and the control sitting in Seattle, how much more important cybersecurity issues become to the operation of the plant. So these are not your father's power plants. These are new and exciting opportunities. And for all of those characteristics that I just described, those are many cases. Those are features, not bugs. But we got to make sure that they don't create such a novel situation around the safeguards and security issues that it makes these reactors more dangerous from a theft or a proliferation point of view. Now, I want to mention a report that NTI is pleased to be promoting. We have worked with the World Institute of Nuclear Security, which is a sister NGO based in Vienna that has, as its title would suggest, a deep expertise on best practice from the nuclear security practitioner community And we have just published with them a new report on security by design for advanced nuclear reactors. And I just want to mention there's 5 key recommendations from that report that I think actually this webinar today is an example of one of the things that's recommended. But the report itself is primarily aimed at the developer community, and so I want to be sure to highlight that this is a tool. I know I asked that the link be put in the chat if we can do that. And there'll be a number of events, including one on the 12th, that will delve in more deeply to this report. But the 5 main recommendations are, first of all, figuring out how to better communicate the international obligations and international guidelines around security and safeguards to the advanced reactor community. And the GAIN website adjustments, the Nexus website, these are all tools that begin to contribute to that. And there may well need to be new guidance developed. I understand the International Atomic Energy Agency is developing a new guidance document for security by design, but we know that also doesn't happen fast. Second recommendation is for regulators to share security best practices and lessons learned in regulatory approaches for advanced reactors. The U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Canadian regulator are the primary ones who've been taking early steps to license these reactors. But the importers of these reactors are going to have their regulators up to date on what's expected. And so there's a lot of information that can be passed around through the regulator system. There's also a need for the reactor developer community to professionally develop their own skills around nuclear security, and I'm sure safeguards as well, to be sure that they are demonstrably competent to address security challenges in the design phase. WINS offers some tools for this in their certification process, but there are other ways that competency can be developed. Fourth, and Jackie, this goes directly to your one of your projects on which I'm glad to cooperate, that subject matter experts should be commissioned by interested parties to further explore key areas and future challenges. And so the Resource Council that you shepherd for the advanced reactor community is one important source. Another important source, obviously presented by the Department of Energy colleagues on this panel, are from the U.S. National Labs, a wealth of resources there. And that's, again, an exciting opportunity through GAIN and Nexus to get access to those. Finally, peer review is an important tool in nuclear security. And the opportunity to do that peer review of designs on the drawing board removes many of the concerns that are often put up about the risks that might come from a peer review of information about a particular site being accidentally and dangerously shared. So if you're just looking at the diagram or the designs for a facility, then that's a different level of concern that might be more acceptable. And if that's done by the developer ahead of time, then obviously that removes some of the burden for the importer. So solving these challenges is absolutely within our grasp. And I'm really excited to have conversations like this that offer that communication option and to continue to push out information about how to manage this so these reactors can come out into the world and make the difference that we need them to make on climate.
Thanks, Laura. That's fantastic. And really appreciate you sort of walking us through like a pretty great sort of overview of how diverse the array is of these designs that are under development. Which not only are our advanced reactor designs fundamentally different than our existing operating fleet today, but then they're also fundamentally different from each other in a lot of ways, which is challenging. So I just want to remind participants on the call to please utilize the Q&A feature and submit questions for our panelists. I'm going to kick us off with a couple. of different questions. And knowing this crew, I just want to encourage us to have an organic conversation, and feel free to respond to each other and ask questions of your own. But first, one thing that to me is sort of threaded throughout Dr. Brent Park's remarks and our conversation and listening to Jennifer talk about future work, is it's really, the reactors themselves tend to get a ton of attention. They're exciting. We have the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program that recently launched. But I kind of view, the advanced nuclear age that we mentioned in the title of this event as really an opportunity for an umbrella of innovation that expands across that entire life cycle that Dr. Park mentioned, and the entire fuel cycle. And at the end of the day, safeguards and security also expand across the entire fuel cycle. And so while it's absolutely critical and important that we talk about how we can incorporate safeguards and security into the design of the reactors themselves, of course, we need to be thinking about how safeguards and security are going to be incorporated into transporting new types of fuel, what these fuel fabrication facilities are going to look like, and then, of course, what the spent fuel management and policies are going to look like at the end. So I just wanted to sort of touch on the fact that, if we tend to sort of lean into focusing on the reactors themselves, we may end up building a bridge to nowhere. If we aren't being very considerate of these other things. And then, of course, today our focus is on safeguards and security applications. So just to kick us off, since you only had a few brief minutes to share some of the work that NNSA and GAIN are pursuing on safeguards and security for these reactors, I'd like to ask, first, I'll go to Christine. And I just want to ask two questions. One is, you mentioned the voucher program. And so I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about how safeguards and security are already involved in that program, and if advanced reactor developers are already working on things related to safeguards and security through that. And then I would also just ask if you want to share what aspect of the safeguards and security work with GAIN you're most excited about in the coming year.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. I think you raise an important point, and it's certainly something that we've talked about within the GAIN team. We are, as we should be, as everyone should be, are excited about the prospect of demonstrating these two new reactors. And I don't think that the demonstration of the reactors through the ARDP program will be the only place in which we see the demonstration of new reactors, which is exciting as well to think that people would take that on independent. So, but you cannot hyper focus on demonstration alone. There is a lot of parallel activity, maybe not as sexy, so to speak, right? As being able to design that new reactor and demonstrate it and operate it. That is Nerd Town. And I love Nerd Town. I've lived there most of my life. However, it is incumbent on us, and one thing that we're looking at hard at GAIN is what are all the other parallel activities within the ecosystem that need to track right alongside of these demonstration projects, such that when we arrive at a moment of deployment, that the whole system is ready, right? So, and that starts, it does really just start with knowing each other, developing those relationships, understanding what is important from and your perspective on why is that important. Then it comes to a critical part of when do we engage? When is the right time? Because sometimes considering some of these questions too early, we can just end up having to redo the work, right? So I think, initially I'm excited that yes, we have had a couple of vouchers come forward, looking in that fuel cycle space, starting that conversation. We've been working with NNSA to put together what I would call a primer, right? Okay, so here's where you can get started to just, put your toe in the water to think about safeguards and security and what that is. Let that kind of mull, exactly, Kevin, that document, and let that mull over. And there'll be the right time for us to bring the developers into a more detailed conversation in this. what I'm excited about and I think it goes also into lingo, we talk about there's advanced reactors, fast reactors, molten salt reactors, right? And they all have different characteristics. But then there's also features, right? There's features that make it marketable for different regions and for different reasons. And being clear, right, when we're dealing with a feature, and that feature, by designing around that feature, we might be able to carry that across multiple reactor designs in the way that we think through it. Also could be something that's useful and helpful to the developers. And then there's naturally going to be things that have to be handled that are not only specific to the reactor design, but also potentially specific to the way that developer has decided to approach. But again, I look at this as an opportunity to think about all of the new technologies we have to bring to bear. This is this is not your father's reactor, right? And that's the best part about this, is that we can bring forward these technologically advanced reactors with all of the systems around it and still meet the cost competitiveness that we need to. So that's what I'm excited about.
Me too. That's great. Thanks, Christine. So Kevin and Allison, similar question to you both. I feel like you barely got to scratch the surface. I've had the privilege of having many conversations throughout DNN over the past year of the efforts that you all have put together, a couple different working groups. I know there's a security by design working group and a safeguards by design working group working on these issues. But I just wanted to give a moment to you each to highlight, again, particular areas of this work that you find impactful, that you might want to just share a bit more on. I really hope to give our audience today an opportunity to kind of get that behind the scenes look at just how much work is actually already taking place on this topic. So Allison, Kevin, whichever one wants to jump in first, please.
Go ahead, Kevin. I'll go after you.
Okay, thank you, Allison. Actually, if I could just mention, so as Christine mentioned, we do have a document on the GAIN website that was released in August of 2020. It's basically referred to as Recommendations and Resources for Advanced Reactor Developers. It covers international security, international safeguards, definitions, guidelines, good practices, also export controls associated with reactor exports overseas. And I was looking through some of the chats. There's actually a very good summary of the proliferation resistance program that Dr. Park mentioned that's also in that document. I guess the thing that, just to sort of talk to the audience about the kinds of things we're working on and what gets us excited, it's really sort of in three areas. One is on the designs themselves, the classes of reactors that are out there. As was mentioned earlier, there's so many different types using so many different types of fuels that present interesting safeguards challenges, not necessarily insurmountable, but ones that are exciting to address, exciting to consider. And those are some of the things that our working groups have been tackling as of late, including with the IAEA. Then there's the technical side from a material accountancy question. How well can these materials be accounted for in a way that meets IAEA material accountancy obligations that may or may not be different from specific domestic nuclear material requirements, but can the IAEA make measurements that meets their timelines for detection criteria? And then third, working on the other side, and the map that Third Way put out, as I was looking at all of the green dots and some of the light green dots and red dots, we're working with most of those countries. Not all of them, but we're working with most of those countries on safeguards. And I know Allison mentioned in the security area as well. And we're working with them, in essence, to prepare the regulatory foundation for the ability to accept these new capabilities. So a country with a nascent or under-resourced regulator probably can't handle an advanced reactor yet. That won't stop them necessarily from being interested in it. But what we want to do, if we can, as Jackie was saying, sort of turn some of these from red to light green to green, is position those domestic regulatory authorities, and my focus is safeguards, Allison's is security, to ensure that those regulators have an understanding, have a domestic capability and expertise, so that when their country is ready, whoever it is in their country can say, hey, are we good? Yes, we're good. We got this. Don't worry about the regulatory side. Let's tackle all the other issues. The worst thing would be if the country was ready with everything else and then didn't have a competent, capable regulator. So I'll stop there with, this sort of a multifaceted approach with the designs, with the technologies associated with implementing safeguards and security, and also with the regulators overseas who would be helping to implement those. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
So for the Office of International Nuclear Security, I'm just going to piggyback on Kevin's great comments. We're incredibly excited about working with U.S. industry to incorporate security by design to make their products, the reactors, more commercially competitive and exportable. And just to parrot many things that Kevin just said, and Christine and Ambassador Holgate, we do work with a lot of these countries that are already in the green category, as Kevin mentioned. And we're really looking forward and excited about working specifically with vendors on their particular design and for deployment in a particular country, because this is where we really think that we can leverage our expertise over decades now that we have to really help U.S. companies, but also pulling out a couple things that Kevin mentioned on regulations. I mean, that's one of the key places to start. We have a lot of partnerships, even if they're in their nascent state, with many of these countries, where that's where we're starting. And there's so many good tools to leverage there, the IAEA documents and others, where we can really help bootstrap countries up. And then once you've done that, even with the security of design, going back to some things that Ambassador Holgate mentioned, it's not just a reactor. We really want to work on that particular design, but also, as Ambassador Holgate and Jackie mentioned, it's also the other things: cybersecurity, insider threat mitigation, transportation security. There is a long continuum of really exciting work that we can really leverage our incredible talent and innovation here domestically, internationally, to make these systems a lot more viable and successful internationally. So thank you.
Thanks. That's really great to hear more details on what you're all up to. So I want to kind of take us up a bit, sort of from the details of what all is happening within GAIN, within NNSA, and talk about the fact that, even in a year as tumultuous, to use the word, as 2020 has been, we've actually really seen a steady stream of positive steps forward for the U.S. advanced nuclear industry. I mentioned the reactor demonstration program launch and selection that was announced earlier this month. And, as multiple reactor developers move towards demonstration and deployment over really the next decade, Laura, I'm interested in your perspective on what steps the U.S. can take now to engage with some of the countries that light up green and light green or yellow, on our map. And also, what does it look like for the United States to, and really these companies to engage with international organizations like the IAEA in a meaningful way?
Well, I think one of the things that the U.S. Can get started on now is to make sure that we've got the legal basis in place to do cooperative work on nuclear energy with those countries that show up green. I haven't done the cross-check between those countries with whom we already have agreements for peaceful nuclear cooperation, so-called 1, 2, 3 agreements. But somebody should, and that should inform the work that's led by the State Department, but with important input from the folks in NNSA to make sure that we've got those in place, and feeding in information that Christine may have access to through GAIN, cross-referencing that with where the developer communities or the vendors might be most interested. And, so that can be done right now. There's nothing that that prevents that work from being done. And then to really think through, does our standard model 1, 2, 3 agreement, which is usually the base, the opening bid of those negotiations, is it reflect the uniqueness of advanced reactors? Is that itself up to date? So that's one set of things that we can get going on right away. Obviously the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has already been doing a ton of work around safety, being ready to license these reactors from a safety perspective. I'm not aware that they have gotten as much work done on that on the security side. And of course, the US NRC is in an interesting situation vis-a-vis international safeguards, because the US is not legally required to apply international safeguards. And that leads me to one of the issues in your second question about developers working directly with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Because the US is not in a 100% safeguards environment like most countries in the world, our nuclear commercial world doesn't think that much about safeguards. It's not their natural habitat. And so they don't naturally think about the IAEA as a source of information and assistance for them on that. From the other side, the IAEA is used to working with governments. And even when they're working with nuclear industry, much of the rest of the world, that industry is a state-owned enterprise. And so it may come with a government, label. So creating space for the IAEA to interact directly with the US commercial community that is working on these reactors across the fuel cycle spectrum is the kind of thing that conversations like this can do. Third Way, NTI, Atlantic Council, and even the US government can do, because it's hard sometimes for the agency to be responsive to questions that come directly from the developer community or the commercial world. And sometimes they don't even know where to go. It was a huge missed opportunity in my view. I mean, Kevin may have a different perspective on this, but the every 4-year safeguard symposium that the IAEA holds to kind of evaluate the state of global safeguards was held 2 years ago with a focus on new facilities. As far as I know, there was one advanced reactor developer there from the United States. And the only reason they were there is because they were on a panel that you and Susie and I built. That was despite extensive promotion with the Nuclear Energy Institute to get the US developer community there. So I think there's a lot that still has to be done. And I think the US government has to help here in creating those bridges between our commercial nuclear community and the resources that are at the IAEA on both safeguards and security. I'll also say the IAEA can itself do better because just like we all live in our little silos of excellence here in Washington, and even, God forbid, within the energy department, the IAEA has an office in their nuclear energy office that's working on these advanced reactors, the INPRO office, that isn't always talking well with their safeguards silo or with their nuclear security silo. And so there's a lot more connectivity that can happen at the Vienna International Center where the IAEA is housed that may make it, make it more efficient to engage with all of the different aspects of these advanced reactor concepts.
Oh, thank you, Laura. That's fantastic. I'm going to turn now to a couple of different questions that are sort of on the theme of some of the things we've talked about from the audience here. And a couple of them, I think, actually present a really great opportunity to address some misconceptions. And I know you just finished speaking, Laura, but this first one is just, you've recently written about this, and so I know it's in your wheelhouse, and I want to invite everybody else to sort of chime in too. But in response to speaking about 1, 2, 3 agreements, and just potentially, what the impact of, potentially expansion of nuclear energy globally could have. One of the questions is, what is your response to the claim of some that expanded deployment of civilian nuclear power would increase proliferation? of nuclear weapons. This is something that certainly comes up quite a bit, but I'd invite Laura to kick us off, and if others want to chime in.
Well, first of all, I think the reality of history would show that that has been very rarely, if ever, the case. Where a nuclear energy program that was started as nuclear energy and turned into a nuclear weapons program. North Korea is one of those cases. Depending on how you think about the history, India and Pakistan could be those cases. But certainly the 5 authorized nuclear weapons holders, they set out to develop weapons. And it turns out you need a reactor sometimes to develop the materials. So the point of that is that the IAEA safeguards regime has already been reasonably impactful in breaking the link between nuclear energy and nuclear weapons. That's why we really need to be sure that the flood of new technologies with all of the differences that we've talked about don't disrupt that known capacity to detect the possibility of diversion, to detect clandestine facilities. Again, this goes back to the size issue. The smaller they are, the more easy they may be to hide. Or if you're talking about refueling cycles on a 10-year basis, that may be easier to hide. And so there's a lot of things that these reactors can create, a lot of challenges they can create. And if it's the safeguard, if the ability to safeguard these facilities is what holds them up in terms of being deployed, then shame on us, because we see this coming. We can, if there's new tools and techniques, if there's new gizmos and detector instrumentation that needs to be developed, we have time for that. And our labs and the IAEA's own labs and labs around the world are really good at this if they know what the problem is and if they're involved early enough that they can do that research and development to create a deployable tool on a relevant time frame. So it just comes back to this communication point. And if these reactors are going to get out into the world at the scale that will be necessary for them to make a difference on climate, we have got to solve this part of the problem, because this is an area that could trip that development up, and rightly so. If these reactors can't be safeguarded, they should not be deployed.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Jackie, this is Christine. So I agree with the remarks. I think what I would say though is there's every opportunity for us to ensure that commercial nuclear power is available and is actually desired. And it does start with each one of us coming to the table honestly with empathy and understanding each other's point of view. No one is here, especially on this panel, no one is here to stop the development of commercial nuclear power and the advanced reactors. It's an exciting technology. I am excited about all the different technologies we can bring to bear today that we didn't have 30 or 40 years ago, that make it such that we can imagine small nuclear reactors and how they're supportive to communities and how it builds resilience in a time in our climate when resilience seems to be challenged on a daily basis. So I guess I would request anybody that's engaging in these conversations with one another that you show up with empathy, that you show up with genuine interest in the other person's point of view.
Ditto. I want to amplify that message as much as possible. Thank you so much, Christine. So I'm going to turn now to a couple of other questions from our audience that are kind of similar in theme here. This one I found really interesting. So what are the liabilities of some of the countries on third way's map that light up yellow or red? Countries that are unlikely ready based off our rubric. What are the liabilities of those countries potentially receiving reactor technologies from Russia or China or elsewhere? And what possible levers, diplomatic, material control, or otherwise, would prevent or mitigate this possibility? So the way that I'm reading this question is, we may, as a nation, or as as we look at countries we deem ready for nuclear, kind of cast these countries in a category that still needs some work. But I guess the question here is, what are the liabilities if countries like Russia and China don't necessarily have the same rubric we do, and are seeking to maybe export to some of these countries? I'll leave that open to any of you that want to kind of jump in on that.
Well, I can start from the security point of view. So I think this is a really good question. It's a really difficult question. We are seeing this in a lot of our partners with whom we're working on with nascent sort of international nuclear security endeavors, but really starting with the frameworks and educating partners wherever you can, pointing them to the proper regulations and frameworks that exist, saying whatever you do, it should adhere to this. This is really, really important. Make sure that your conversations include this. I mean, it's a little bit behind a curtain because you want to be very, very careful. But I do think educating is certainly, I would assume the same as for safeguards, but certainly for security, of these are the key principles of nuclear security. And by no means should you ever compromise any of these. You should put tremendous resources behind them. You should ask a ton of good questions, but this is the standard you want to meet, IAEA, if not exceed. So I think helping where you can in the best, most political way, because these are complicated conversations, but education, I think, is one of the key areas to assist.
So it sounds like, as you and Kevin both talked about, we're already engaging with a lot of these countries as it is. So even if they may not particularly be asking for or signing on a dotted line for a U.S. advanced nuclear product, the fact that we are still engaged and educating with these countries. Kevin, yeah.
Jackie, I think that's a good point. And it's a catch-22 to a certain degree. While as a representative of the U.S. government, I very much want to see U.S. vendors be successful in the global deployment strategy of these facilities. We also have to recognize that there are international competitors out there, a few that you've mentioned. So, the important part here from the non-proliferation regime, security safeguards, for example, is to ensure that the regulatory framework is in place in those countries, that the regimes led through the IAEA and the international inspectorates at the IAEA has technical credibility and capability to look for and detect any indication of undeclared activities or diversion, and also work with the vendors in the United States to ensure, and this was one of the things that was discussed earlier, that there's as little possibility, as little opportunity as possible to misuse those facilities. So it's one of the things that Ambassador Holgate was talking about, is let's make sure that while those designs are being done for safety, of course, economic viability, of course, those are key drivers in the success of advanced reactors. While we're at it, let's also be looking early on in where are the safeguards challenges going to be and can we address those? I guess back to one of the things Ambassador Holgate said, I have yet to see a design that was so worrisome that safeguards couldn't come up with a way to do something. The point is paying attention to what those needs are, working proactively with the design community now, with the IAEA now, with the nuclear industry and NGO community now, to ensure that everybody knows what kinds of things should we look to do, what kinds of issues should we look to address in a technology perspective or an approach perspective. But again, I think as was said earlier by Christine, our goal here is to help the industry be successful, and at least in our small parts in the safeguards and security side of the house, ways we can help that in the by design space is important, and ways we can help that on the regulatory side from the importer is just as important.
Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, I think,
Go ahead.
so I think, to put a little bit of lingo on this, we really don't want safeguards and security to be an aftermarket part, right? I mean, we don't want to be installing this on the back end. And I've seen a couple of questions come through around, won't this increase the cost? Not necessarily, it doesn't have to. If we wait too long, if we push it to the back end of our design cycle, okay, it can cost us more money. It can cost us. It's a little difficult right now to determine when is the right time to engage. You need to be far enough along in your thinking of what you are building and what you are designing, what your fuel cycle is, and potentially where you want first deployment to be. And that's a lot to ask of a developer, to have all of that aligned. And it's going to be different for each one of them. This ecosystem is growing, and they're growing in their momentum. And so we're going to have to be willing to engage when they're ready, right? And they're not all going to be ready at the same time. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think we just don't want safeguards and security to be an aftermarket part.
Yeah, Laura.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that point more. That's why people think that safeguards and security now have been so expensive, is because they have been aftermarket parts applied to our current fleet. And so people think that costs a lot. If you do it right up front, it doesn't have to. But I wanted to get in particular on this point on the competition with China and Russia. It's absolutely the case that they have been eating our lunch when it comes to the gigawatt scale of sales, but they don't have anything close to the diversity of types of reactors in these advanced reactor contexts. And so the diversity of those green dots on your map means that they're not all going to need or be able to use what limited designs the Russians and the Chinese are selling. So we do have it. I mean, the Russians are selling the only thing that kind of fits under this small modular or advanced reactor is their floating power plant. And it's not exactly small, but and it has its own interesting safeguards and security issues, which I think are far from being worked out. And I think that's partially why they haven't gotten a lot of people buying those yet. China's working on one gas reactor style. I'm not aware that they've got much else in the advanced reactor box. So we actually have a chance, if we do this right, to compete not only on our American brand, which still has cachet in terms of its quality, by being high quality on safeguards and security, but also having a more flexible portfolio of reactor types that can be sold to different types of countries for different types of purposes. And so I think if we do this right, we do have a chance to really compete against China and Russia on these new reactor types in the way that we haven't on the older ones.
And I think sometimes our best defense is a good offense. Sorry for all the sports analogies, but in this case, I think as we engage and these developers go through licensing, and we see a licensing framework that's addressing these issues as well, just being the best example, right? And showing other countries how to do this. And I think Allison was mentioning it earlier, helping them ask the right questions, whether they purchase from the United States or not. We want to make sure that they're asking the right questions for themselves.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's a great discussion. We're starting to run out of time here, but I did want to mention, I feel like we've done a fantastic job here of including really some of the key stakeholders that are working on the safeguards and security applications for these advanced reactors. But of course, there are other agencies and other stakeholders in the United States that play a really key role. And former NRC Commissioner Stephen Burns actually commented on the fact that the NRC has published, preliminary rule language on physical security for advanced reactors. And so I bring that up to just highlight the fact that we have talked about a section of the really amazing and important work that's being done on this. And I certainly look forward to expanding our dialogue and having follow-on conversations where we bring in some of the other folks that are working on these issues. Thank you to all of our panelists for a fantastic conversation today, a very timely conversation as we move into what I believe will be another very rapidly paced year when it comes to the development and demonstration of these reactors here in the United States. With that, I will turn us back over to Jennifer Gordon.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for such an outstanding panel. And thank you to our panelists, Laura Holgate, Christine King, Allison Johnson, and Kevin Veal. Thank you especially to Dr. Brent Park for his excellent keynote remarks. And thank you to Jeff Chamberlain at NNSA and to Jackie for bringing the idea for today's event to the Atlantic Council several months ago now. Thank you also to Third Way for co-hosting this event. The best events involve a lot of teamwork, and today's was no exception. So thank you to Ambassador Richard Morningstar, founding chairman of the Global Energy Center, and to Randy Bell, director of the Global Energy Center, for their commitment to establishing a nuclear energy policy program at the Atlantic Council. Thank you to Emily Burlinghouse, assistant director at the Global Energy Center, for her work on today's event. And thank you to the Atlantic Council's outstanding events and AV teams, especially to Mercedes Sapupo and to Roger Morales. Finally, thank you so much to our wonderful audience. Thank you for your engagement and for sending us your questions. Stay safe and stay well, and I hope to see you all again soon.